Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Tuvas and welcome back to another DCS World tutorial video. In today's tutorial, I thought I'd cover a topic that is not a very popular item being discussed, but is arguably a very important topic, especially for newcomers to DCS. As we all know, flight stick and throttle setups are incredibly expensive and therefore are often considered barriers to entry for flight sims like DCS. Today, I'll show you how wrong that is. Today, we will be going over gamepad bindings in the SU-25T, the free module that comes with DCS World. So if you guys have a gamepad like the Xbox One controller or maybe the PS4 controller, I can't really speak for it, I don't own one, but you too can also play DCS. Alright, so to kick things off, let's go ahead and bind some of the most basic requirements needed for flying a plane, and that is the axes settings. So let's go ahead and press the escape button, go to adjust controls. Make sure you have the SU-25T selected, and let's go ahead and go to the Axis Commands category. From here, we're going to go ahead and bind the pitch, roll, and rudder axis. So for pitch, double-click the cell for your particular gamepad. Oh wait, that's not pitch. Let's go here, and then move the left stick in the direction you want to be able to pitch. So left stick up and down. Once it's registered that direction, go ahead and hit OK. Same thing for roll. Go in the direction you want to roll, so in this case left stick left and right. Once it's registered that, hit OK. And then for rudder, I'm going to set this to my left and right trigger buttons, or axes, triggers, whatever you want to call these. And that is because, at least in the case of the Xbox One controller, the triggers are both on the same axis. The only difference is that right trigger goes plus so many points, and then left trigger goes minus so many points. So this is kind of a nice way to minimize the amount of settings to bind to technically two different axes, but it's really just one. I don't know if this is the case for other controllers, but at least for the Xbox One controller, I'm able to do this. So I'm going to bind the left and right triggers both to the single rudder axis. So hit that to once that is detected, hit OK. And then from here, what you'll notice is that even though I am no longer moving the left stick, there's still a little bit of input being made on both the pitch and roll axes. So we have to introduce a dead zone. Now, keep in mind, you may not have to do this, or whatever you set for the dead zone may not be the same as me. So you'll have to play with this in the same way I am going to show you now in order to get this to the correct setting. So let's go ahead and start off with the pitch axis. So select that particular cell, click on axis tune, and then from here, since we know that we're modifying pitch, let's go ahead and pitch forward and then slowly bring it back to center and see if that's the offending direction. It doesn't look to be, so let's go ahead and pull back on the stick and then slowly bring it back to center. And here we can see that there's quite a bit of distance. So our goal is to make the red square and the top and bottom red squares, I should say, meet each other by increasing the dead zone setting. So let's go ahead and increase the dead zone setting so that both squares become one. And there we go, they are now one single red square, and then hit OK. So the dead zone is now set for the pitch axis. Let's do the same for the roll. So once again, this is roll. So let's move the stick left, return it back to center, see how bad it is. That's not bad at all. Let's go to the right, then bring it back to center. And that's really bad, actually. Look at that distance between the two. So let's go ahead and increase the dead zone so the two squares become one. There we go. And that is all the way to 11. In fact, I'm going to bump this up to 12 just in case. Alright, so in this case, I'm setting that to 12. So now, I'm going to play around with the stick as much as I want, but as soon as I let go, no input is being made, no matter what direction I'm in. So that's perfect now. Now, in addition to the pitch, roll, and rudder axes, we also want to bind a way to look around the cockpit. And that is the absolute camera horizontal view and vertical view. And we're going to set that to the right stick control on our gamepad. So let's go ahead and set that for the horizontal view. So just like before, just move in direction left and right on the right stick to detect that particular direction, hit OK. And then for vertical view, up and down on the right stick, and hit OK. Now, same thing as before, there's going to be a little bit of a dead zone issue. So let's go ahead and do the same thing as before. Select the first cell, axis tune. This is horizontal view. So let's go left. And then let's see how bad that is. That's pretty bad, but let's see what right is like. Maybe that's worse. No, it's not, so it's going to be the left direction. So let's make it go all the way back to center really quick. Okay, that's about as close as it's going to get, and increase the dead zone. It's really not that bad, so it only needs a little bit of dead zone tuning. There we go. The two squares have now become one. dead zone 5 in this case, and hit OK to save that. And now do the same for the vertical view, axis tune. Let's go up, see how bad that is. That doesn't look too bad. Actually, that's not bad at all. Okay, let's go down, see how bad downward direction is. Okay, yep, that's the worst one. So let's go ahead and increase the dead zone so those two red squares meet and become 1. There we go, and hit OK. And there you go. So no matter how much I move the right stick and let it return to center, I'm never going to see any more input being made there. So there you go. That's how you know that's set. So now, with that said, the absolute camera vertical and horizontal control has to do with the head direction that you're looking inside the cockpit. But if you notice, let's go ahead and hit OK to save our settings. If you notice, as I turn my head to the right inside the cockpit, so just look at the direction I'm facing inside the cockpit, at a certain point, your pilot's going to not be able to move their head any further because that's as far as they can rotate their head to the right. But if you notice, if you look at the overlay of my controller, my right stick is still able to move pretty far beyond that without affecting the direction of the pilot's head, which means there's a lot of distance that can be made, which is basically going nowhere. Same thing for the left direction, same thing for down, same thing for up. So let's go ahead and adjust that so that we don't lose all that range of motion because the pilot can't turn his head that far. So let's go to Adjust Controls, back to Axis Commands, and for the horizontal and vertical view, just go ahead and tune those axes again. And in this case, because I already know what the value is, just go ahead and reduce the saturation Y all the way down to 40. So set that to 40, hit OK, do the same for the vertical view, axis tune, saturation Y to 40. There you go. Now, if you notice, the pilot's head is all the way to the right, and I can't go any further right, like physically, on my controller. Additionally, I can't do the same for the left direction, same for down, and same for up. So everything is now in sync with how far the pilot can look is how far I can push the right stick in that particular direction. So everything is now lined up. All right, so with those basic controls set up, let's go ahead and start the aircraft, which is not actually possible to do at the moment because we haven't bound those settings. So let's go ahead and once again go into Adjust Controls and go all the way down to the Engine Start option. So what you'll notice that there's an engine left start and engine right start. What we want is to start both engines with a single button press. So go down to Engines, plural, Start. So let's go ahead and select that, double click our respective column for our gamepad, and then bind that to a setting. So one thing to note is, if you notice, we only have so many buttons available to us on the face of this gamepad. We have like, what, 4 face buttons, 2 left and right bumpers, 2 triggers, a D-pad, and like a couple control sticks, and we're able to click those in. That's not a lot of buttons. So one thing that DCS allows us to do is to specify very specific buttons to be what is known as modifiers. So what does that do? Say, for example, you want to bind A to the weapon trigger button. But what if you also want to bind, for example, weapon select to the A button as well? Well, one thing you could do is you can set it up so that by simply pressing A, you're able to fire a weapon. But let's say you want to change your weapon. You can make, for example, the select button a modifier and then press A while holding select. That effectively doubles how many functions the A button is allowed to do. So if you press A without pressing a modifier, once again, you fire your weapon. If you hold down the modifier and then press A, you then change your weapon. So that is an example of the power that modifiers allow. So in our case, we're actually going to introduce 2 modifiers. We're going to use the select button and the start button as modifiers. So let's go ahead and set those up. To do that, go ahead and click on the modifiers button down here, and then click on Add, select our gamepad from the device name, and then press the button we want to set as a modifier, in this case the select button. Hit OK, click Add again, do the exact same thing, select your gamepad, and then in this case let's press the other button we want to use as a modifier, in this case the start button. Hit OK, and now those are both set. These 2 buttons can no longer be used for individual functions here or actions, but they effectively, I guess, quadruple how many buttons are available to you in all the other face and shoulder and directional buttons. So with that said, let's get back to binding our engine starts. So there's kind of a rule of thumb that I use for how I want to use my modifiers in relation to how often I'm actually going to use that particular function. So in the case of engine start and stop, I mean, you're not going to be using that in the middle of a dogfight. You're literally only going to use it when you first load up, when you land and need to rearm. So those are the only times you are ever going to want to start and stop your engines. So because of that, I'm going to lock that particular function behind the most amount of modifiers I can use, and that is both modifiers at the same time. So for engine start, I'm going to go ahead and bind that to the right D-pad direction, but I'm also going to lock it behind both modifiers. So I'm going to press the select button, and then I'm also going to press the start button. That adds both the buttons here. So that what this is saying is you have to press both the select and the start at the same time, plus the right directional button on the D-pad in order to use the engine start function. So let's go ahead and press OK to save that setting. And then same for engine stop. We're going to do something similar. Again, select modifier, start modifier, so both at the same time have to be pressed, plus the left directional pad. So go ahead and hit OK. Now, in addition to this, you also want to turn on your electrical power system. So very similarly, because we're only ever going to do this like once when we start up, again, put it behind both modifiers and press the up directional pad button. So that'll be what we use to turn the electrical system on. So hit OK, press OK to save your settings, and let's go ahead and test this out. So once again, both modifiers are being pressed, both select and start. While holding both of those, press the up button on the direction pad. If you notice, all of our electrical systems are now on. And then once again, press and hold the select and start button modifiers and press the right button on the directional pad. That will now start your engines as seen down there. Now it's a little hard to see the gauges to see what exactly is going on. So what we're going to do now is actually bind a zoom axis so we can more easily see our gauges. So go ahead and go back to adjust controls, go to axis commands and go to zoom view. What we're going to do is we're going to set up one of our axes to be used as part of our zoom so we can see things a bit further out, or we can expand our field of view so we can see things a bit easier while taking off or landing. So what we're going to do for this is we're going to actually bind this to the same axis as our rudder. Now you might be wondering, well, that's kind of dumb. Wouldn't that conflict with using the rudder? So one of two things would happen. You would be inputting your rudder left or right, but then you would also be zooming in and zooming out, giving yourself a headache. Well, no. So first off, if you attempt to do this and hit OK, you'll actually clear your original rudder setting and replace it as the zoom view. So your triggers will now only control zoom and rudder is no longer controlled. But we're not doing that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to add a modifier. In this case, we are going to set it up so that we can hold the select modifier and then use the triggers to adjust our zoom level. That way we don't interfere with the rudder settings and we can still use the zoom in and zoom out as an axis. So let's go ahead and use the select modifier and bind our left and right triggers to the zoom view axis and hit OK, and then hit OK to save. And now if you hold the the select modifier and press right trigger, we can now zoom in. Similarly, if we want to zoom out, we can press the left trigger. And then if we want to hold that particular zoom level, once we're at a position where we like it, we just let go of the modifier while holding that trigger setting, and it locks it there in that place. Now, you might have noticed something. Let's try zooming in, and then letting go of the modifier. If you notice, the aircraft is actually ruddering left and right, depending on what I was pressing at the time, the moment I let go of the modifier. So that's actually the downside to combining axes like this. If you happen to want to, for example, zoom out to this point using an axis, the moment you let go of the modifier, you'll be inputting that direction on whatever axis is being used without the modifier. So it's kind of a trade-off. If you want the ability to use two functions on a single axis, you'll just have to put up with this kind of little bit of conflict. It's not too bad though, considering this is just the rudder. Now that said, if you noticed, right trigger is doing left rudder and left trigger is doing right rudder. Those things actually need to be inverted. So let's go to adjust controls. This may not be the case for you. Maybe it's not inverted for you, but for me, I noticed that it is inverted. So left trigger, right trigger, I want those to be inverted. Axis tune, invert. So now right trigger is right, left trigger is left. Hit OK. Let's test it out. Right trigger, I go to the right. Left trigger, I go to the left. So perfect. Alright, so now that we have the engine started, we can actually zoom in on the gauges now because we've bound that as well. We can see all the gauges are in the green, so we're good to go. Let's zoom out, let go of the modifier at the appropriate zoom level. There we go. Now let's go ahead and start rolling to the airfield, or rolling to the runway. Well, that's kind of an issue. I don't have anything I don't have anything bound for the throttle up and throttle down, so let's go ahead and fix that. Go ahead and hit escape, adjust controls, scroll all the way down to the throttle up and down settings. Under the T, so throttle up, let's go ahead and bind this to our right bumper with no modifier because we want to be able to adjust our throttle setting without any kind of restriction on it because this is kind of an important function. So go ahead and hit OK to set that and throttle down to the left bumper. Okay, hit OK to save, and now what you'll notice is that you can now control your throttle with right bumper and left bumper. Right bumper increases, left bumper decreases. Now if you notice, if I were to press the right bumper for just a split second, the throttle actually moves a pretty significant distance. Same with left bumper. So you have to keep in mind is that the sensitivity of the throttle is actually pretty high for each individual button press. So even though it feels like you've only pressed it for so long, before you know it, you may have increased all the way to max throttle when you thought you were only down to like a quarter. Oh, and now if you notice, even though I'm throttled all the way down, I'm not actually stopping. It's because the engine is idle, but we're not actually hitting a brake. So let's go ahead and set up a brake. So adjust control and scroll all the way down to wheel brake on. So let's go ahead and set something to wheel brake on. Now, this is going to be going in the same vein as the engine start. We're not going to use the wheel brake very often. We're really going to use it when we're on the ground and we need to stop, obviously. So what we're going to bind this to is we're going to bind this using both modifiers, same as the engine start and stop, and we're also going to bind it to the left bumper. Because we use the left bumper for throttling down, it only makes sense that if we want to stop, we should use the same left bumper button, because it just kind of flows naturally that way. The only difference is that we have to press two modifiers plus that same button to stop. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit OK, save our changes, hold both modifiers, and press the left bumper. And just like that, we stop. Perfect. All right, so in addition to that, though, in order to take off properly, well, for starters, we kind of need to close this canopy, and we need to be able to raise our landing gear. So let's go ahead and bind those functions as well. So adjust controls. First up, canopy. I personally like to set this to the right stick click, so because this is also something we're not going to be doing very often, let's set it to both modifiers, and let's set it to the right stick click option. Similarly, let's go down to landing gear up and down. So landing gear up and down, we'll go ahead and set this to both modifiers because we will only ever do this when we're taking off or landing, and then set this to the left stick click option. Hit OK. Hit OK. All right, so let's go ahead and test this out. So if we press both modifiers and click the right stick in, there we go, you can see that the canopy is closing. Now if you press both modifiers plus the left stick in, we can say, oh, no. Ah, damn it. Yeah, that's a problem. That is a problem. Well, the landing gear works. That control binding was saved, but now we are in a position where we are apparently, oh boy. Yeah, that's not good. Hold on for a sec. And we're back. So let's just quickly go over all the things we've bound so far. So once again, flight stick has been bound. Our head look has been bound as well. Right and left rudder have been bound. And let's go ahead and turn on the aircraft. So press both modifier buttons and the up direction on the D-pad to turn on our electrical power. And then again, both modifiers plus right on the D-pad to start the engines. Let's go ahead and hold the select modifier and right trigger to zoom in and take a look at the gauges while they're starting up and make sure everything is moving correctly. And let's just go ahead and speed this process along by speeding up time. There we go. Engine has started. Let's go ahead and zoom back out. Select modifier plus left trigger. Put it the zoom level I want and let go of the modifier. There we go. Close canopy by pressing both modifiers and right stick in. Do not press both modifiers and left stick in because it raises the landing gear and you are in a whole world of trouble. So let's go ahead and throttle up with right bumper. There we go, right bumper. And then we will go ahead and taxi to the runway. There we go. If you notice, we actually have a bit of armaments on us because we're also going to be binding our, our air-to-ground weaponry options. Yes, thank you, thank you. Okay, we're going to start lining up for the runway. And as we're lining up, we're also going to hit the brake to make sure we are not moving until we are ready to take off. So line up with the runway. Throttle all the way back. Both modifiers plus throttle down button to stop. And just like that, we are ready to take off. So now for takeoff, there's a couple controls we want to bind related to flight controls. And that is, one in particular is going to be the flap setting, and the other is going to not really be used for taking off, but rather for landing, and that is the air brake. So let's go ahead and bind both of those settings. So hit escape, controls, and now let's go ahead and set something to air brake on and off. I personally like binding both of these options individually, but considering a gamepad only has so many buttons, what you yourself may prefer is to bind both options to a single button in using the air brake toggle option instead. But in my case, I'm going to use air brake on and air brake off. So for air brake on, I'm going to go ahead and set this behind the start modifier, and then I'm going to press the button that inherently means slow down, which is the left bumper, because that's for throttling down and also for brake. Now, likewise, for air brake off, or in other words, to go faster while flying, I'm going to set that to the start modifier plus the throttle up button, which is the right bumper. So go ahead and hit OK. And now we also want to set our flaps up and down option. For this, I'm going to set both up and down to the same button. So flaps up and down toggle, which is this guy here. We're going to set this, again, the start modifier, to the, oh sorry, not the, wait, the start mod, no, we're going to set this to both modifiers because we aren't actually going to be using flaps up and down too often other than when we take off and land. So because of that, we're going to set it behind both modifier buttons. We're going to set that to the right bumper. All right, so with flaps up and down now set, let's go ahead and press OK. Press OK to save our changes, and we will start our takeoff. So let's double check our bindings. So we have set the flaps up and down, so let's go ahead and press it. So both modifiers plus right bumper. Both modifiers plus right bumper is not working for some reason. 1 second. Just controls. Huh. Thought I set that. Flaps up and down. Oh, you know what? There we go. That's why. There. Okay. And okay. There we go. Flaps down. And now that flaps are down, our air brake we don't need to use, but let's just go ahead and check it and make sure it was set. Oh, why wasn't that? Okay, what is going on? Air brake on, air brake off. Oh, right, because I was pressing air brake off. Okay, so start modifier plus left bumper turns the air brake on, as we can see there on the bottom left. Start modifier plus right bumper, air brake off. And perfect. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and take off. So put the throttle to max position. Both modifiers plus left bumper to hold the wheel brake. Let go of the two modifiers, but continue to hold the left bumper. And let go of left bumper now that we begin to roll. Alright, and we are beginning our takeoff. Once we hit about 250 kilometers per hour, we will slowly start to rotate our stick back. In other words, pull back on the stick. Try to stay lined up with this. We're at 220. 230, 240, and 250. Let's pull back. And don't pull up too sharply, just enough to get lift. Press both modifiers and then click the left stick button. That'll raise the landing gear. The start modifier plus, or sorry, the both modifiers plus right bumper to raise the flaps. And we'll start rolling out to our first waypoint. Now, how do we know where our first waypoint is? Well, we're going to have to set a few controls for that. Go figure, right? So let's go ahead and press escape. And then go to controls. And we're going to have to set up all these different modes so we can go to each one, well, except for gun sight reticle. We'll set up the first three to the D-pad functions on our controller. So, first one, navigation mode. Let's go ahead and set that to the the start modifier and up on the directional pad. Press OK. For longitude missile aiming mode, we'll set that to down on the D-pad and set that behind the start modifier. And then air to ground mode, we're going to set that to the right on the D-pad, and then again behind the start modifier. Additionally, we want to be able to switch between different waypoints. So we want to be able to click to the next waypoint. So let's go down to next waypoint. That is under N. Here we go. And what we're going to set this to is going to be the start modifier plus the Y button. All right, and if I haven't mentioned this already, so the way that I determine whether or not something goes behind the start or select modifier, or both, is based on these three categories. So if it's something I am not going to use very often, I'm going to put it behind both modifiers. If it's something that I'm going to be using for just simple navigational systems or just modifying certain other aspects of the aircraft that are related to flights, then I'm going to put it behind the start modifier. If it's something that's related to weapons, for example, adjusting the targeting pod, getting ready to pump out, to enable the IR jamming or the ECM, for example, I'll be putting that behind the select modifier. So think of it this way, stuff not being used that often, both modifiers. Stuff that's not related to weapons, start modifier. Stuff that's related to weapons, select modifier. Okay, now that that is out of the way, I think that's all we need to navigate to our first waypoint. So let's go ahead and press OK. And then we will switch our navigation mode to en route. And then we will change our waypoint to waypoint 2. All right, and then if you look down at the bottom at our HSI, we are basically going to make sure that the yellow needle is the direction that we're going, or slightly lime green / yellow needle, whatever color that is. All right, and now we are on our way to the first waypoint. Now that said, I kind of want an easier time while flying, so there's a couple more things I want to set up. So first off, we are going to set our trim settings. So let's go all the way down to the T's, and we are going to set up all our different trims except for the rudder trims. So left wing down is simply because trimming is actually a very, very common thing that pilots do during flight. We are not going to hide this behind any kind of modifier. So this is simply going to be left on the D-pad, no modifier. Nose down is up on the D-pad. Nose up is down on the D-pad. And right wing down is right on the D-pad. Okay? Additionally, we want to also set up our autopilot system to make it easier for us to go to different parts of the map, and also so we could go heads down without worrying too much about what direction our plane is going. So let's go ahead and set up, where is it? Autopilot attitude hold. So for this one, we are going to hide it, since we are actually going to be using this pretty often, we're going to hide it behind the systems modifier, which is the start modifier, and we're going to set this to A for attitude hold. Okay? And then for the next one, we are going to set up autopilot barometric altitude hold. So let's double click that. Again, behind the start modifier, and we're going to set it to B for barometric altitude hold. And also we need to set up a autopilot disengage in order to turn off the autopilot. So double click that behind the start modifier and set that to X for close or cross or stop autopilot or disengage. Okay? That's just some ways to remember why I've set those up. All right, so with those three autopilot options set, let's go ahead and press OK to save our changes and go en route to the target area. So again, start modifier and set attitude hold for the autopilot. And now we are well on our way. Oh, and our RWR is picking up someone, so let's actually get set up for our seed mission. All right, so first off, we've already set up air to ground mode. However, if we turn that on, what was it again? Systems? Yeah, there we go. If you notice, we actually have no way to target and attack any kind of radar sources, even though we have seed weapons on, because we haven't bound those controls yet. Go figure. So let's go ahead and bind our sensors related options. So if we go to the categories, go down to sensors, this will make it way easier to find what we're looking for. And we're going to bind first the electro-optical system on off. For this one, let's go ahead and bind this behind the weapon modifier, or sorry, not weapon modifier, but the system modifier. So even though this is related to a weapon, it's not directly controlling a weapon, it's just enabling the use of. So I'm going to put this behind the system modifier, which is the start modifier, and then set that to See, this is when having so few buttons becomes kind of a conflict. So I think in this case, we might be better off setting this behind both modifiers, because the moment we turn it on, we're probably not going to turn it off again until we're done with our ground pound mission. So I'm going to set it behind both modifiers and the Y button. Hit OK. And then we are also going to set up the ELINT pod as well as the night vision FLIR or LLTV on off. So first off, let's go to the ELINT pod. For this one, we will set this behind the weapon. No, we'll set this behind the. We'll use both. No, not both, because we have that bound already. We're gonna set this behind the system modifier, which is the which is the start modifier, and click in the left stick. Okay. Press OK, and then for the night vision, we're going to do something similar. The start modifier plus the clicking in the right stick. All right. So with both of those set, now we need to be able to actually control our target designator. So for that, we are going to put that behind the weapon modifier. So let's go ahead and do that. So do the select modifier or weapon modifier. And then for our target designator down, you use the down on the D-pad. Similarly, target designator left, weapon modifier, left on the D-pad. And then designator right, right on the D-pad, weapon modifier. Then designator up, up on the D-pad, weapon modifier. And lastly, target lock, because this is very important because we want to be able to lock onto targets or select targets on our HUD. So for this, we are going to do weapon modifier and set this to right bumper. All right, and if you notice, we are not going to bind target unlock because it's actually not terribly necessary for the SU-25T, since you can simply just click on the target again or click away and then, you know, lock something that's not a target and it'll automatically unlock anyways. So this is not terribly necessary to bind. All right, so let's go ahead and hit OK. And then let's go ahead and turn on our what's called our Phantasmagoria pod. But first we need to remember what we bound it to, which I thought was, there we go. It is the left stick click. And let's disengage the autopilot. Weapon modifier plus D-pad, navigate onto that diamond. And then right bumper to select it. And oh, wouldn't you know it, we can't fire because we haven't bound our weapon release button or weapon trigger button. So let's go ahead and go to adjust controls, scroll all the way down to weapon fire. And for this, because it's going to be a very common button we use, I mean, we're firing weapons here, we're going to go ahead and set that to the A button. And while we're at it, we're also going to set up our countermeasures, because those are also very important when engaging targets. So we're going to go ahead and go to countermeasures, flares, dispense, set that to the X button without any modifier, because again, we need ready access to countermeasures whenever we need them, and chaff to the Y button. And of course, last but probably not least, we are going to set up something to the B button, and that's going to be the laser ranger. So let's go down to the L. Where is the L? Because I don't know my ABCs. JKL. There we go. Laser ranger on and off. Let's go ahead and set that to the B button. All right, hit OK. Hit OK. And let's go ahead and hold the A button to launch. To launch. To launch? Why aren't you? Oh, because I'm not within range. Duh. All right. We are now within, we have launch authority, we're within range. Hold A and launch. Hold A, then launch. Perfect. We are combat capable with our gamepad, gentlemen. Oh yeah. So let's go ahead and turn away before we get shot down by that SAM sight system, whatever that is. Which we could have already been launched at, so let's go to pump out some chaff while we're turning out. Okay, now that we're perpendicular to the SAM side, let's go ahead and set up our autopilot to this direction. Let's slow down because it looks like we're overspeeding our aircraft. There we go, it's calming down. Let's go ahead and speed back up to about half throttle. Yep, that should be good. Alright, and cool, great, we were able to launch a missile successfully. Now, let's go ahead and turn away from our target objective and get some distance so we can then prepare for an air-to-ground strike. So one thing I wanted to point out about the autopilot system is that it's actually more useful in more ways than just, automatically setting an attitude or altitude hold. So in addition to doing that, it can actually retrim your aircraft without any manual intervention. So for example, I'm going to trim like roll right and pitch up. So this is me trimming, I'm not holding the stick in this direction. So let's say I wanted to hold, let's say like this position, even though my trim is out of whack. Well, all I have to do is just put it to where I want it, and then once it gets there, set the attitude hold, and it'll then retrim the aircraft for that position. Then I can disengage the autopilot, and just like that, I am trimmed for this attitude. It's perfect, it's great. You don't have to actually touch your trim buttons to get everything all lined up the way you want, so it's pretty neat. Alright, so now that we are pretty far away from the target area, let's turn back in, and we are now facing our targets again. Now let's go ahead and zoom in and see if we can't spot them. Yep, there they are. So let's do barometric hold. We'll slow down a little bit as well to about half throttle. And then let's go ahead and get our pipper on the target area. Yep, there it is. So let's go ahead and ground lock, or ground stabilize, whatever you want to call it. Oh, and barometric hold, there we go. And let's see, so at the moment, it's really far away. I can't actually zoom in, so let's bind our axis button, or axis setting, to zoom in on the Shkval. So adjust controls, go to the axis commands, and set the I-251 zoom to the right stick up and down motion. At least this is what I like setting it to. Now, keep in mind, if we just set it like this, we will be removing our binding for our head movement. So make sure to also set the select modifier for weapons. Alright, hit OK, and there you go. So now, just like that, hold down the select modifier and press up or down if you want to zoom in or out on the Shkval. So that's great. So let's go ahead and zoom in and find a target. And just like that, we can see a few targets out there. Let's see, from what I can tell, that looks like a ZSU-23. Those look like armor. Oh, those look like launchers right there. It's like a couple smaller armors, probably BMPs or something. But this guy, you see a little like dish looking thing on top. So I'm going to prioritize this guy for my attack. So let's go ahead and disengage autopilot. Move towards the target area, and then re-engage autopilot once we're in the correct attitude that we want. And we'll go ahead and use our Vickers to take on these targets. Now if you notice, we don't currently have our Vickers selected. So in order to do that, we need to, well, bind yet another setting. So let's go ahead and do that. Adjust controls, scroll all the way down to weapon change. So we'll go ahead and select weapon change, bind this to the select modifier, and then press the A button, because that's the same button we use for weapon fire. Hit OK. And also, while we're here, we're also going to set up additional countermeasures. So previously we set up the countermeasures FLIR and countermeasures Chaff, but in addition to those, we can also enable ECM as well as IR jamming. As seen, come on, where's my ABCs? There we go. There. So for these, I like to personally set these to FLIRs and Chaff Jettison respectively, except with a modifier enabled. So for IR jamming, we'll go ahead and set this to the same button as the countermeasures FLIRs dispense, but we'll hide it behind the weapons modifier or the select modifier. Hit OK. And then similarly, for ECM, we will set that to the Chaff dispense because ECM is related to radar and Chaff is related to radar. And so we'll hide it behind the weapons modifier or the select modifier. Hit OK. And now we're good to go. So let's go ahead and hit the weapons modifier and press A. Now we have the Vickers selected. Let's go ahead and disengage autopilot. Get realigned for the target area. Let's pick up our speed a little bit. Set attitude hold so that we maintain current course towards the targets. There we go. Attitude hold. Alright, and we are now inbound. Now, we also want to make sure, I can't actually remember, so let me double check. Adjust controls. Yeah, so we want to make sure our laser ranger is ready to go because that's what we use for the, for the Vickers. Let's actually do this. Readjust ourselves to the left a bit. Alright, and we are still locked on what looks to be a Shilka. We're getting closer and closer. Now that we're approaching the area, let's go ahead and turn on our ECM jamming. and turn on our IR jamming. Then zoom in again. There we go. And launch authority now. Rifle. Let's go ahead and wait till the explosion. We'll slow down as well. Wait till the explosion hits, and then we'll find a new target. And shack. Find a new target. Ah, there we go. SU-25T. And laser ranger and rifle. Wait till the shack. Increase airspeed. Or increase throttle, I should say. And shack. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and pull out. Zoom out. And as we're pulling out, drop flares. Just in case we get shot at. And just for added effect, we'll go ahead and look at the third-person view. Oh yeah, that looks great. Alright, and just like that, we were able to perform a successful air-to-ground run, too. So let's go ahead and turn off our ECM and our IR jamming. We'll go ahead and set our attitude hold so that we are retrimmed for our current position and airspeed. There we go, and throttle back to about 3/4. Okay, great, we are doing pretty good. Alright, so next, we also want to make sure we have our cannon bound, because we haven't actually done that yet. And we'll go in for a gun run. Of course, this might end, considering there's still another ZSU-20 or ZU-23 out there, this might be a death sentence, but let's go ahead and try it anyways. So let's go ahead and do adjust controls, go down to cannon, and bind that to something. In this case, I like to set it to not the weapon change button, but instead the B button. Actually, which one do I prefer more? Yeah, let's just set it to B because that's the open setting. Let's go ahead and hit OK. So once again, weapon modifier. So the select modifier plus B. Hit OK, and then switch to gun. There you go. All right, so let's see how we do with a gun run. And target area is now in front of us. Let's go ahead and weapon modifier plus right bumper to ground stabilize. Zoom in. Let's get a lock on. Let's say, let's go for this guy right here. I think that's another ZU-23. And then we'll try to go in for a gun run. All right, let's do this. Oh man, this is gonna be interesting. This is the death sentence. Let's get that speed up. Get our ECM jamming and IR jamming ready to go. Trim downward a little bit manually. Trim up to stabilize. Okay. We're not in range yet. That's alright. Trim down, trim down. Pull the throttle back. Line up those two circles. And fire. Okay, we damaged it. Let's go ahead and pull out. Drop the flares. Oh boy. Definitely getting shot at. Oh man. Okay, that actually worked out okay. I don't think we killed it though, which is kind of unfortunate. But that's alright. Okay, anyways, so that is basically it for all the bindings that we need for air-to-ground combat. And technically air-to-air. As long as you have air-to-air missiles, everything we bound will work with those as well. So for example, if we do weapon modifier, systems modifier, plus I think what I set it to, down on the D-pad? Yeah. So all you have to do from here, once you're in latitudinal missile aiming mode, whatever the setting is called, all you have to do is move that middle crosshair over a target, then you just hold A and launch a missile. So that's all you got to do to launch an air-to-air missile. It's pretty straightforward. Alright, so with that said, let's go ahead and return home by switching over to the route mode, or navigation mode, and set to return, which is already set to. And let's also turn off our ECM and IR jamming. And we'll go ahead and head on home. We're slowly approaching the return point for our home airfield. Let's disengage autopilot and roll towards the airfield. We can actually see it out there in the distance next to that hill. You guys can't see it, it's right there. There we go. Zoom out a little bit. Okay. And we are still on the return route. At some point it's going to switch to landing. Come on. There we go, switch to landing, so let's turn in towards the airfield and get ready to land. Now there is one final binding that I'm going to have you guys bind. Well, actually probably two more because it's probably good practice to bind these as well. So first off, let's go ahead and, once we line up with the airfield, there it is. Once we're lined up, we'll go ahead and do that. Set attitude hold. There we go. We are now retrimmed for our current speed, and then autopilot off. Okay, the last three bindings we're going to set is first up. I know I didn't mention this earlier, but it's good to make sure you have bound, and that is going to be the weapon jettison, or the weapon, where is it called? Yeah, weapon jettison button. So for this one, I am going to hide this behind both modifiers because this is not something you're going to be doing terribly often, and if you accidentally do it, it could mean just complete disaster for your mission. So in my case, I'm going to hide this behind both modifiers, and I'm going to set this to the A button. So because we use the A button to fire weapons, putting it behind both modifiers and pressing the fire weapon button will mean I want to weapon jettison. Okay, so go ahead and hit OK. And similarly, we also want to be able to jettison any fuel tanks. So jettison fuel tanks is another one we're going to set. And for this, once again, we're going to do both modifiers. And then we'll go ahead and set this to the... Oh boy, there is no buttons left for that. Ah, come on, man. Oh wait, hold on. Yes, there is. Ah, there we go. Because I didn't press both modifiers. There we go. Okay, now they're set. So this is weapon jettison. And let's go ahead and set it to the... let's set it to the B button. So for weapon jettison, it's going to be the A button. And for fuel tanks jettison, it's going to be the B button. Hit OK. And last but not least, this is in particular for our landing attempt, we are going to want to set our drag chute to a button. So dragging chute. Let's go ahead and set this to both modifiers, just like before. And we're going to set this to something like... Actually, you know what? I'm going to set this one to B because this will stand for brake. So both modifiers plus B will stand for brake. And then jettison fuel tanks is going to be X. Because that's just left over. B makes sense to me. I'll remember it when I think of the letter B for brake. Okay, there we go. And hit OK. Alright, so let's go ahead and first off, jettison all our weapons. Both modifiers plus A. I feel sorry for anyone below. Alright, we are now light as a feather. Let's go ahead and throttle back all the way to reduce our airspeed, and we're also going to deploy our air brakes so we can slow down. And let's go ahead and set our attitude hold for autopilot so we can trim out. Oh, come on. There we go. Disengage autopilot, line up for the airfield. Re-engage trim, or sorry, autopilot attitude hold so we retrim. And then let's also lower our flaps. Down. Oh, and gear down is also something. So both modifiers plus left stick click.
Gear down.
And system modifier plus, or sorry, both modifiers plus right bumper. There we go. And now we should be pretty good for landing. Let's disengage autopilot so we have control of our aircraft again. And bring it in for a landing. This is looking pretty good. This is looking pretty good. Keep an eye on our vertical airspeed indicator. We don't want it to drop too quickly, so we want to keep that number in the 1 to 5 range. Ideally closer to 1 than 5. And just nice and easily put her down. So let's drop the airspeed by flaring. And I don't mean like countermeasure flaring, but pulling the nose up and flare as we descend. And nice and easy. Touchdown. Beautiful. So let's go ahead and pop the drag chute. So both modifiers plus B, because that's what I remember. And just like that, we've successfully landed. Alright, now that we've slowed down considerably, let's go ahead and hold both modifiers and press B again to drop the parachutes. Go back into our aircraft, and we'll just slowly taxi off the runway. Alright guys, and that is basically it. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, please leave a like if you really liked it and would like to see more of this kind of stuff. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and tune in next time for some more DCS World tutorial videos. Also, if you'd like me to cover any other DCS modules using the gamepad, let me know in the comments below. Take care guys, have a nice day.